In this video, I want to show you how to populate a tenant with the required objects like VRF, bridge domain, application profile, and endpoint group. For this, I've created a diagram that shows the internal structure of the tenant that we're building. So think about this diagram as a master plan that we're going to use in order to navigate from left to right through all the ACI objects as we create them with Terraform. Again, we begin with an empty working directory. The only thing I have here is a private key for user that I will be using for a signature-based authentication. So let's create the main TF file. And the first thing we need to do here is to declare provider declaration. I've covered this in a previous episode, so if you want to know how we do it, please go watch it. Terraform required providers ACI, and then like this, source Cisco DevNet ACI. Next thing we have to do is to configure this provider so it knows how to reach ACI. Provider configuration. Provider ACI URL is https net and the port, and then user name Terraform user, and then password. No, we're not going to be using password this time. We're going to be using certificates and signature-based authentication. So let's do private key and then the key file form user.key, and then we need to know APIC which certificate to use. So it's going to be cert name Terraform user cert. So we are going to create a tenant and the name should be vanilla. So for this, as last time, we use a special resource called ACI tenant with the name tenant local name. So why am I using local names like this? Because the name of a tenant is going to be vanilla. Why don't I use vanilla here as well? Because it might be that later on I want to use a variable to create a tenant, and then if you use a variable, it's not going to be vanilla anymore. So for me, it's a little bit easier to reference the objects in this file by using this tenant local name kind of naming convention. So this is going to be our tenant. So let's save it and let's do all the usual things. Terraform init to initialize the working directory and to download the providers. Also we do Terraform plan and Terraform apply. Yes. So let's see now in ACI if our tenant was created. Yeah, we have a tenant now. So we're gonna do it step by step, and after adding each object, we're gonna check in ACI if indeed it has been added. Now, we can actually take two ways. So one way is start creating application profile, then EPG, and the second option that we have, we can do we can create VRF, we can create bridge domain, and we can create subnet. Doesn't really matter that much which way you take, what you create first. However, I really prefer creating networking objects first, because if you create VRF, bridge domain, and subnet, then you can create EPG, and EPG will ask you to connect to a bridge domain. So if you create EPG before the bridge domain, it's not that convenient, so it's better if we create bridge domain first and then we create EPG and connect it to a bridge domain. So let's start with the VRF. So I again go into documentation and I want to know which resource is going to create a VRF. So it's this one, ACI VRF. Let's take a look, what do we need here. So tenant DN is required. So here we will be referencing a tenant, and also the name of VRF is required. So let's go and do it. It's gonna be VRF resource ACI VRF, and then the name is gonna be VRF local name. So name is going to be global. Actually, let's make everything lowercase. Global VRF. So here, one note about naming, I always use underscore first of all. That's because, let me actually show you. If we go to APIC and if we go to any object, like let's say tenant, and open it in object store, then we see that ACI, for all objects, it creates some distinguished name. And what it uses in distinguished name is dash. It's always dash. So the system will never use underscore. So if you are naming your object that you are creating like this VRF, avoid using dash, because then you will not know what was system created, what was user created. If you use underscore, you always know that this part of DN or of whatever is user created. And I also like to mark all the objects with their function. So if later on in ACI, in the UI, you will see a drop down with the VRFs, you will immediately see that this is actually a VRF and not just a, let's say this, like a global. What global? This can be BD, VRF, or something else. So I would put VRF in here. Then we have tenant DN. So this is the place where we actually say that this VRF belongs to this tenant that we created. But how do we make this reference? So this reference is done very easy. You take the resource name and then the local name, and let me show you. So it's going to be ACI tenant dot, then tenant local name, and then ID. Let's do Terraform apply. You will see it wants to add one new object. Yes. And now we should be able to see, if we go networking, VRFs, we have our global VRF in here. So let's see what we have to create next. So we created tenant, we created VRF, we need to create a bridge domain, and we need to connect this bridge domain back to a VRF. So let's go again to the documentation and let's see how to create bridge domain. Resource ACI bridge domain. So what you need here, required, you actually need again tenant DN, you need the name, and I told you we need to attach this bridge domain to a VRF. This should be somewhere here. Yes, this one, relation FVRS CTX. So let me actually copy this since we're here anyways. And let me paste it. Okay, let's do, it's a bridge domain. bridge domain, resource ACI, bridge domain, BD local name, and then let's use name for this bridge domain is going to be global BD for global bridge domain, and then tenant DN, we can do exactly what we did for the VRF, ACI tenant local name ID, and then this thing relation to the context. Context is another way for the VRF. So in other words, we say this is relation to a VRF. And then in the same way we say ACI VRF, that's the resource, and then VRF local name, that's the local name, and then ID. Okay, let's save this and let's go and create a bridge domain. Yes. One resource added. Let's go and check if that's a correct bridge domain. Bridge domain, if we go into policy, so here we can click a star. So every time in the UI you want to go to a bridge domain, it will open you the place where you have stars. So this bridge domain relates to VRF, global VRF, and it belongs obviously to our tenant vanilla. So next step we created BD. Next step is to create a subnet. So subnet 10.0.0.1/24. Okay, going back to the documentation, subnet, ACI subnet. So you have parent DN, which is in our case bridge domain, and we also have IP. That should be enough. ACI subnet. So we say subnet resource ACI subnet local name parent DN. So parent for this one is a bridge domain, so we say ACI bridge domain BD local name ID. And for IP, we're gonna say 10.0.0.1/24. Let's go here, apply auto approve, and here in ACI we should be having our subnet. One thing that I forgot, actually later on we're gonna create a L3 out, and we want the subnet, because we will connect L3 out to this bridge domain, so we want this subnet to be advertised out of ACI through some dynamic routing protocol. So for this subnet to be advertisable, we need to have scope advertised externally. So how do we actually do this? Here in the subnet we say scope and public. So let's again do auto approve, and let's see here it's now enabled. So next step, we are finished with this lower part. Now we need to create application profile, and we need to create two EPGs, web EPG and app EPG. So let's do this. Application profile resource. Again, we don't know the resource. Should be something like ACI application profile. ACI application profile, and then tenant DN and the name. Okay. ACI application profile, and then AP local name, and then tenant DN is going to be, just not to type it again, no, tenant DN is this one, and name is going to be 3-tier AP. Let's see if that works. Okay, in ACI, if we now go to application profiles, 3-tier AP. I don't have any application EPGs yet, so that's what we are going to create now. So let's go and see again, documentation, EPG, ACI application EPG. Why is application EPG? Because we also have external EPG and we also have micro-segmented EPG. So that's why we need to explicitly say that this is the application EPG. And endpoint group application EPG is usually where you connect your servers. So what do we need here? Resource, ACI application EPG. Then we need to, and also you can see on this picture as well, we need to connect it back to the application profile. So application profile DN and then name. So yeah, this both are required. Let's do web EPG first. Resource ACI application EPG, and then the name web EPG local name. So name is going to be web EPG, and application profile DN is going to be, let's see here, ACI application profile, ACI application profile dot AP local name dot ID. Should be enough. Okay, if we go now back to ACI, we see that we now have web EPG, and we also, I forgot one thing that I mentioned actually to you, that we need to connect this EPG to a bridge domain, otherwise nothing will work. So let's go again back to documentation and see how we can connect it to a bridge domain. It's usually somewhere here in the end, something that says bridge domain. Yeah, this one, relation FVRSBD. Let's copy this one. Let's paste it here. And bridge domain we can actually copy from here. So it's going to be ACI bridge domain BD local name ID. So let's go back to ACI and take a look. If you go to EPG and if you see policy general, you see that now, where is the bridge domain? Yeah, there's no bridge domain. But if we now do Terraform apply, and if we go back, BD just appeared here. So we have created web EPG. We also need the application EPG, app EPG. And for this one, it's going to be easy. We just can copy and paste, and it's going to be app EPG. And let's change the local name here, app EPG, and then this part is the same because it refers back to the same application profile, and it also refers back to the same bridge domain. So in ACI terminology, what we're doing now is called application-centric deployment, opposite to a network-centric. So let's go and see if it works. Yes, we also now have app EPG, which is also connected to a bridge domain. So that's it. We've built our tenant. One last thing, and maybe some of you maybe already asked this question. In ACI, so ACI by default is a blacklist model. So if you create several EPGs, they are not going to be able to talk to each other because you need a contract which will explicitly allow communication between the EPGs. So contracts is one way of doing things. Another way is to add EPGs into something that is called preferred group. So this is that I have here. So preferred group is basically if you add EPG to a preferred group, then it will be able to communicate to any other EPG that is also in this preferred group. And preferred group is connected to a VRF. So it's based on a VRF. So it's inside the VRF. So we need to enable it in the VRF, on the VRF level, and also on the EPG level. How do we do this? We have already created EPGs. So now we need to actually mention that they are members of a preferred group. So if we go back to documentation and if we have application EPG here, so you see here preferred group member. So this is the attribute and allowed values are exclude and include. And in our case, if we look now, where is this preferred group member? This is excluded. We want to make them both included. So let's say preferred group member include, and also here preferred group member include. And let's apply it again. And let's see now in ACI, it is now included. But I also told you that on a VRF level, actually policy, we need to enable preferred group. So now it's disabled. We need to enable it. And it's a little bit tricky. Let me show you, because this attribute is not, it does not belong to a VRF itself. So this is the VRF object. You will never find anything related to preferred group here. But if you do view children MOs, managed objects, if we do this, at the bottom we have something that is called VZ any, and here we have preferred group member disabled. So this is what we need to change. If we now go here and say any, look for any, we have another resource for this, ACI any. It relates back to a VRF, and then we can say preferred group member enabled. So let's do exactly this. VZ any for VRF, resource ACI any local name. Now, what was it? VRF DN. VRF DN is going to be, where is our VRF? So it should be ACI VRF VRF local name ID ACI VRF VRF local name ID, and then no ID please, yeah, and then preferred group member enable. Again, let's deploy one more time. So what does it want? Expect to prefer to enabled or disabled? Yes, enabled. Okay. Let's deploy one more time and let's see here. So it changed from disabled to enabled. So now these EPGs are going to be able to communicate to each other even without a contract. So what we need to add later is the L3 out, but that's going to be the next video. We have populated the tenant with the required objects, but we're not yet done. In the next video, I will show you how to create an L3 out. Till next time.